Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on procurement's role in shaping the strategic agenda. I'm Kristen Rellihan, a Senior Director at ProcureAbility. I am delighted to welcome today's guest, David Loseby, who describes himself as a pracademic, which is part practitioner, part academic. David brings over 30 years of senior level executive experience across procurement, supply chain, and organizational transformation, and his career spans both the private and the public sectors worldwide. He's held leadership roles in industries ranging from pharmaceuticals and banking to aerospace, retail, and healthcare, and notably served as the group CPO for Rolls-Royce, where he pioneered a behavioral science-led approach to digital adoption. He's recognized as a global thought leader in procurement, supply chain, and change management. And David is also an accomplished author, academic editor, and speaker. His expertise extends into sustainability, behavioral procurement, and applied behavioral science, areas where he continues to shape thinking and practice across the profession. David, it really is a privilege to have you join me today for this conversation.
Thank you, Kristen.
So let's set the stage for our conversation and maybe frame the context here a little bit for our audience. It's said a lot. Procurement is at an inflection point, right? But I truly believe that is the case today, where delivering value isn't just about managing costs or contracts. It's reimagining the function to be innovative and resilient, more strategically aligned with our business partners. Right, we're facing pressures and opportunities ranging from GenAI, advanced analytics, and supplier-led innovation, where we're trying to demonstrate greater organizational agility. Overall, the expectations of our procurement leaders have never been higher. And I think that's why today's conversation that we're going to have is so important. So let's explore what's working, what isn't, and how top-performing CPOs are redefining procurement's role to drive real impact. Okay, so let's just dive right in, David. Let's establish a little bit of a foundation here. And, in your opinion, what does it really mean for procurement to innovate and elevate today? And why is that so critical now?
Well, I think, Kristen, the term innovation, in a sense, can mean many things, and some people sort of have a misconception about innovation, insofar as it's some big bang thing that sort of is suddenly the new penicillin that's just been discovered. When actually, in reality, it can have many different faces and be applied to many different things, and I think that procurement, as we all know, does touch pretty much every single part of the business. So is well positioned to be able to act as that sort of, how can I put it, unique collaborator across the business, and do that horizon scanning, as well as being able to sort of then act as the bridge with the supply chain, because ultimately that's the ecosystem, in a sense, that feeds the engine room of growth within the business. Hence the reason why innovation can come from lots and lots of different places. And I think that's where procurement plays a great role then in sort of almost, I'll call it, harvesting, synthesizing, and then a phrase that I commonly use, which is making sense and translating that. And what I mean by is making sense of an opportunity to innovate and do something different, whether that's in terms of creating greater resiliency, greater opportunities, a new pipeline, a new opportunity. But I think in that sort of translation, then translating it into a way that other parts of the business or the supply chain then understand the context and the opportunity. And so therefore we do have quite an important role in that sort of translator space in all the things that we do. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we in some ways have to operate a little bit as a chameleon. In other words, we have to adapt to different environments and different cultures constantly. So our way of operating almost has to be in sync with whoever it is, whoever the audience is, or whoever the stakeholders are, or whatever the opportunity or issue is. We have to adapt to that particular situation. And I think that's where, for me, in a sense, the big shift has been happening for a number of years, away from this very sort of, how can I put it, almost rigid, tactical sort of procurement function that is purely there, seen to be there to sort of set the rules, set the operation, and actually just drive cost savings, and that's it. I think those days are hopefully well and truly long gone, albeit the organization will still expect us to take care of, managing costs, cash flow, working capital, all those kind of things. I'd almost say that's almost the entry ticket these days, and you just sort of accept that that's the baseline. It's from there that you then start to elevate, if you like, the next agenda and talk about all the other things that a business may need to do. And that's particularly true where we now are firmly in what's called a polycrisis. In other words, there are so many undefined and, how can I put it, unpredictable events happening, either geopolitically or across our supply chains, such that maybe the previous decades where we've enjoyed a high degree of stability and certainty, we now have to embrace the inevitability of change and, how can I put it, almost sort of redefinition of what we're doing, almost as a constant. And I think that's the difference, and that's where I think the modern procurement function starts to then have a very different role. And I almost describe that as a T-shaped role. In other words, you've got the core skills that sit across the top, but then you have a whole series of vertical specialists through a trust network, then start to collaborate and bring in the different strands and capabilities across the organization.
One of the things that you described there earlier really resonated with me when you described, the need to be a chameleon, right? And I think a lot of that really holds true when we're, elevating that procurement function and trying to demonstrate to our business partners internally and, up through the C-suite, the importance and the strategic function that procurement can hold, because we need to be able to evolve to each of their different needs and wants, right? And kind of use our project management skills to pull it all together, to synthesize, to use your words, right? And to be able to help them to see the big picture, right? And where procurement is helping them to drive, how you can help to drive those strategic initiatives that they're seeking to achieve. So where do you see that biggest opportunity for procurement organizations to get more visibility into the boardroom or into the C-suite, so those CPOs have a true influential seat at the table?
I think there's different ways in which this can be done, and again, I think that this all depends upon the culture of the sector and a huge degree of, how can I put it, different factors. So a one-size-fits-all approach is clearly not going to work. So, but I think some of the principles will be about understanding the priorities, understanding the principles of operation, understanding the external factors, and dare I say, having a greater degree of understanding about the supply chains for which we then set up. And this is not just our tier 1 supply chain, but actually all the way through to our tier 4, tier 5 supply chain partners. And I think that one of the things that people must recognize is that invariably 70% or so of the new ideas come from the SMEs and the smaller organizations, that because they have the agility and the flexibility and less constraint, shall we say. They're not as rule bound as big organizations. So actually fostering those relationships and connecting with those SMEs and harvesting that innovation and bringing it through into the organization is particularly important. So I think taking a very different role, but sometimes I'll reflect on some of the things that I did at Rolls-Royce, which were sort of, in some cases, were not necessarily seeking permission, but almost seeking forgiveness, on the basis that you could see something needed to be done. You'd have a series of conversations with people and say, look, surely it makes sense for us to do X, Y, or Z, and then simply enact upon it. And I remember a very interesting conversation with the group CFO, where we'd had a report in place, a report format that had existed for several decades, to the best of my knowledge. And I said to somebody, I said, how many people read this report? Oh, well, not very many people at all. So I said, well, why is that then? Oh, well, it's got all the facts and figures in it and all the rest. I said, yeah, but it doesn't have any of the narrative. And the thing that was missing was the narrative. So I actually put all the figures in and facts about, the savings and the working capital. I put it in the appendices and then wrote a report that talked about, what was happening in the business. And it gave us the opportunity to, how can I put it, shine a light on things that we were doing collaboratively with other parts of the business and our supply chain partners. And it was interesting. The feedback that we then got from the business was just completely different in terms of, it was like, no, we take all that stuff you put in the appendices for granted, because we know that you guys do a good job in terms of all that what we call tactical stuff. It's that other interesting stuff that we didn't know about that's really, really interesting. So the shift was quite tectonic in terms of then the readership of the report that came out. So I think it's doing things like that just, how can I put it? It almost goes back to the critical thinking skills bit, which is, why am I producing this report? What is the purpose of this? Remove some of the biases, if you like, that are there, and start to think about, what's the reasoning for this existing? What is it? What purpose is it serving? All those kind of things. And you start to think about this in a very different way. And that's just a very simple example of the whole sort of piece of innovation. I mean, I guess the other thing as well is that, again, another example is back to Rolls-Royce. I mean, I was there during both pre and during and post COVID period. During the COVID period, we had this sort of, how can I put it, wonderful offer, if you like, from the Prime Minister of the day, Boris Johnson. And the phone call came in, and it was like, we want you to build 5,000 ventilators in 12 weeks. Oh, and by the way, you start tomorrow. Bearing in mind, we'd never built a ventilator ever in our lives. We didn't have a production line for it. We had nothing. And we had to source about 3.5 million parts in 12 weeks. So that means then you've radically and fundamentally got to do something different. So you have to innovate right from the get-go. And that is about sort of saying, right, what is it that we've got to do? What's the purpose of this mission? What's our, to use the term, our North Star? Our North Star in this is, we collectively have to produce with our partners 5,000 ventilators for the benefit of the country. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated. So you start to take some very, very different decisions and approaches. But I think because procurement and supply chain have a very central role, we are so well positioned to do those kind of things. And I think it's grabbing those things with both hands and accepting the challenge, rather than going, oh, that's a bit risky, that's a bit difficult. Right. Well, sometimes you've got to go there, you've got to go do it, and you've got to have the adaptability and the flexibility and the agility in your mindset to be able to approach those kind of things.
Well, and you had a pretty good nudge there, right? To have to be innovative and demonstrate curiosity. How do you encourage organizations, especially those that aren't in that nimble, small or startup type phase, to really embrace being curious, right? And driving innovation, both for the internal teams, and then how do you stretch beyond that to build that same mindset with your suppliers, right? Those partners that you have that can help you to collaboratively grow. How do you encourage that when you don't have that type of nudge that you were given to produce the ventilator.
Well, it certainly was a nudge. Probably describe it more than that, but I think the reality is you have to go back to the fundamentals of saying, unless you have the right culture and you have sufficient degree of trust in those partnerships, those relationships, and how can I put it? You can articulate that common ground, but also, quite importantly, and it's a bit like sort of the classic structured collaboration sort of approach, there will be things that you say we don't have in common. So let's face into those and understand how we're going to deal with them, because otherwise they become blockers or impediments at a later date. So it's a bit like that conscious awareness piece that says you are consciously making decisions about things that you know aren't compatible. So it is about understanding those issues right at the outset and making provision for them. Also being very explicit about where the commonalities are, and also, with my behavioral science hat on, if you like, finding the motivations for not just organizations, but teams and individuals to want to do something. I remember having conversations with people saying, you do realize if you sign up to this sort of ventilator challenge, it means that you're going to be working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 12 weeks. And I remember very, very vividly one person coming back to me and saying, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity where I'm going to get so much experience from. And aside from all the other sort of, I've done it because I believe it's the right thing to do, the experience and the ability then to leverage that capability in a future role will just outweigh, if you like, in a sense, the short-term disadvantage that you might take. So I think it's about finding those motivations, those common grounds, and those roots, in a sense, to find a common way of moving forward, because ultimately we will not be successful in supply chain orchestration if it's purely on a control and command basis. It has to be done in a way that is collaborative and with mutual respect, but with high degrees of trust. Particularly now we recognize more and more that actually whole supply chains compete with a competitive advantage, not a single organization. So it's a very different mindset that brings about the way in which you can orchestrate those kind of things.
Well, and you touched on something that's really near and dear to me, and it's that leadership responsibility to create the environment or the culture that encourages outside of the box thinking, right? It is a safe space to collaborate and bounce ideas off of each other, because without doing that, it's just status quo, right? If we just keep creating the report that we've created forever because it's not actually addressing the need, right? And the changing need. And so, in this time of us really trying to advance the procurement function and demonstrate our ability to lead change, right? How can the leaders of our procurement organizations build the agility within their teams and within themselves to try to adapt and thrive, right, in this very competitive environment and in this environment of constant change and instability? What are some of the skills that our leaders need to be able to demonstrate in the culture they need to create to be successful?
I think there are a number of factors. Some of them that instantly spring to mind are about authenticity of leadership. So being an authentic individual, I think, but also for me, in building that sort of upskilling and that capability, I think it's about then listening and understanding the individuals, listening and understanding what their motivations are, where they want to take their career. I think also having the ability to create what I call psychological safety, which is if you get something wrong, particularly when it's high pressure, there are lots of moving parts and lots of things that we've maybe not even faced before. I think it's having the ability to say, as soon as you start to see things going off track or there's an issue, please call for help, because that's not a weakness. That's a recognition that you have identified something that's out of scope. So it's better to call that out and actually flag it, because it then means then that we can reprioritize resources or whatever else is needed to support that. So it's not a sign of weakness. Actually, it's a skill that's been identified, which is you've identified an issue and allowed us to reprioritize resources to actually address that issue. So I think this, and again, this comes back to another behavioral science skill, which is talks about what's called cognitive framing, which is if you express things in the positive as opposed to the negative, which is the classic sort of, is the glass half full or is it half empty? Utilizing that sort of language and terminology is hugely important, as well as one thing that a CEO told me many, many years ago is, don't forget, sometimes it's the really little things that make the big difference. So just a simple thank you, or well done, or thanks for staying on late, or whatever it happens to be. It may not have to be something, how can I put it, really, truly significant. But actually, that's a great motivator for teams and people who are doing things usually, and particularly in the current environment, in quite dynamic and quite, how can I put it, stressful environments where supply chains are really being tested.
Well, and it's being seen, right? There's so much invisible work that folks do, right? And so just knowing that your leader acknowledges the effort that you're putting in and the time that you're spending, and creating that safe environment for you to work in with them and all of that trust, I think that's where we begin to build, truly exceptional teams, because we're vulnerable with each other to raise our hand when we're stuck or we've made a mistake, and we know our team is going to help us work through it. But then they also recognize the efforts that we're putting forth. I mean, that's almost all anyone can ask for in a job, to be appreciated for the work that they're doing. It really is simple, but you're right, it's quite often overlooked.
It is.
And it just creates a better environment for our teams to kind of grow and thrive.
Yeah, and that's back to the environment and culture. The interesting thing that we've talked about here is the skills that we've talked about and the attributes are not the sort of things that are, or how can I put it, frequently, I'll call it, appear on the syllabuses of professional bodies and, dare I say, academic establishments, because they're not seen as being core. So the things around sort of, supply chain analysis, breakdown analysis, how to construct an RFP, all that kind of stuff, all those, what I would call technical skills, are the dominant skills of most, if you like, in a sense, training and development that's done formally to prepare people for the world of delivering procurement and supply chain activity. So this is quite a departure, and this is why it's so important, because it falls upon leaders, in a sense, to recognize that and therefore do the upskilling and the reskilling, which is just as equally as important, if not more important, in the world that we're moving into, that's digital and has lots more attributes associated with artificial intelligence, GenAI, large language models, all that kind of stuff. It's equally important, not more so.
Well, and kind of on that point there, discussing how do we elevate and innovate within the procurement function, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about GenAI here. So, where do you see some of our top performing CPOs using those types of tools to make the greatest impact on their organization and help to accelerate their transformation?
I think some of the good cases that I've seen of recent months, and I've chaired a few workshops globally with senior executives, and some of the things that have come out have been really interesting in terms of contract obligation management. So this sort of whole, you get a contract that's, thousands of clauses and, takes years to prepare and all the rest of it with lots of schedules. Guess what? Managing the obligations in that contract on both sides. So in other words, what we're obligated to do and what our contracted partners are required to do is often where lots of the value is actually left sitting on the table, or actually creates a devalue type situation whereby actually it counters the value that could be delivered. So I think that's a very, very good and important use case in the world of procurement. I think there are other things that we all now recognize in terms of where we start to think about classification of data, and the ability to go, we've got something here that looks very similar to something over here. Is it the same? Yes, we might have to initially do some of the, how can I put it? Yes, that is the same, or no, it isn't, with human intervention. But going forward, all those derivatives and all those options, in a sense, then start to happen automatically. So that's where this sort of partnership between, how can I put it, skilled and capable people combined with GenAI and tools like that, start to then become quite powerful in organizations. So again, it comes back to the fact that yes, there are certain commonalities, but also there are quite high level degrees of how can I put it, context and organizational context and situational context that are still relevant even where we've got GenAI, because no two organizations are exactly the same. So therefore we need to recognize that we don't all fit neatly into a square.
No, we certainly do not. So maybe just one final question to wrap us up here. We've talked about this journey that many organizations are on as we're, really seeking to earn that seat at the table and to be a part of the strategic conversations at organizations. So, maybe one thing, top thing in your mind of, how can a procurement organization define their North Star?
I think a procurement organization first has to start off with, what is the organizational North Star? And therefore, as a consequence, what is the singular thing that we then have to do as procurement to make sure that absolutely enables that, irrespective of, if you like, all the externalities and internal mechanisms and processes. And that might even mean that as a consequence, the cascade and the flow down from that is we have to redesign and redevelop certain processes, capabilities, systems, but that's all part of the alignment piece. The whole alignment piece is about that classic pyramid, which is we've got the organizational North Star, but that then breaks down into all the functional areas, all the supply chain, etc. So it is about bringing that together as an amalgam and understanding that the diversity, if you like, in a sense, of all those different factors.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, David, that is a perfect way to wrap us up here today. So as we approach the bottom of the hour order here, I just want to thank you for taking time to sit with us today and sharing your insights and perspectives. It's been a really thoughtful conversation. And thank you to all of the folks who joined us here live or watching this be restreamed. We really hope that you were able to grab some practical takeaways and new ideas that you can apply within your organization. So if you found today's session valuable, we would love for you to like it and share it. Continue the conversation in the comments. If you'd like to learn more or connect with us on LinkedIn, we would be happy to be able to chat with you there as well. You can click on the link that we're going to drop into the chat here to sign up for insights to be delivered straight to your inbox. So this fall, our team, like many of you, I'm sure, will be attending various industry conferences, and we would love to meet you there in person. So if you do plan on attending a conference, feel free to drop me a line. You can see on our website our full list of where our team will be under insights and industry events. So once again, David, thank you so much for joining us today and spending some time with us. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We will see you next time.
Thank you. You're most welcome.